Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. This is episode 19. And today we are delighted to be talking to musicians and artists Heal and Harrow from Scotland, who are giving an artistic response to the witchcraft story. So we're going to be looking at three women again this week who were charged as witches. And what's really interesting about this is that Claire did the research on the survey of Scottish witchcraft online and used the database. And through using that was able to see that the three women we're going to talk about, their stories were interwoven. So Claire will tell you more about that. But the first woman that we're looking at this week is Margaret Abernethy. So what we know about her was that she was a widower and is described as having low status. There's mention of her begging for alms. So she was clearly somebody that didn't have anything. And on the 15th of July, 1669, Margaret Abernethy was accused of maleficium. Do you think that's right, Claire? Maleficium rather than maleficium?
Maleficium or maleficium, it's... I think you would have Latin scholars maybe arguing it was one particular way, but maleficium, I would probably say.
And that is an act of witchcraft performed with the intention of causing damage or injury. So that is also known as any magical act intended to cause harm or death to people or property. We know that the Privy Council granted a commission to try her as a witch and that she was actually held in custody in Aberdeen prison while she awaited her trial. Now, This is quite interesting. She was accused of providing what's described as raw enchanted flesh so that Gaelis Burnet could kill her husband, and she was supposedly paid 6p and a pint of ale, but we don't know the outcome of the trial. Now that on its own is super interesting to me for various reasons, but what is the super interest of this week is that it's interwoven then with the story of Gaelis Burnet. So I'm going to hand over to you, Claire, so you can explain why this is interwoven.
Yeah, so what happened was I was looking at the story of Margaret Abernethy online, and I noticed that as a lot of these witch trials are, they're interwoven because people make allegations about other people in their village and then they're tried as well. Sometimes they're tried at the same time, sometimes they're tried at different times, and there's a connection between these people. Now, what happened, it would appear, is that Margaret Abernethy was prosecuted first, and she was prosecuted alone. And by that, I mean that she wasn't prosecuted with Gaelis. Is it Gaelis or Gaelis Burnet? I'm not quite sure. If anyone knows the pronunciation of that, please let us know through our social media. I'll go with Gaelis while I'm speaking to you. But they weren't tried together. So what was alleged that Margaret Abernethy had done was that she had provided raw enchanted flesh. Now, exactly what that is, I don't know. I am assuming it's the flesh of an animal and some spell has been cast over it, and that was given to Gaelis Burnet so she could kill her husband. Now, remember what we've spoken about before with the Witchcraft Act, and I keep promising to tell you all about it, and I surely will sometime soon. The Witchcraft Act could have you convicted as a witch and killed, but it was also a crime of witchcraft to consult with a witch. So if you go to somebody and you ask them for help as a witch, provide me with a spell, provide me with your magic to help me in some way, like this maleficium, you could also be found guilty of witchcraft under the Witchcraft Act. So that the act of asking for the assistance of a witch would bring you under the definition of witchcraft.
I mean, I suppose it's no different to now, and that I'm obviously not an expert in Scottish law, but I've watched a lot of TV programmes about American law, And it seems to be that if you contract a hitman, then you are also guilty of murder. Is that correct?
Exactly. It's the exact same thing.
You're getting somebody to do your bidding. That's an illegal act.
Indeed, you're equally as culpable. In criminal law, sometimes when we're trying to describe how different people can do different parts of a criminal act, we describe it by way of a bank robbery and say, if you are somebody who is contracted to drive a car and you sit outside a bank but don't go into the bank, and you let people, you know that the plan is to go into the bank, to rob the bank and to bring the money out, you're equally as culpable of that robbery as somebody who's gone in and brandished the weapon and asked for the money, even though you haven't committed that physical act. But you're equally as culpable because you're called what we call in Scotland art and part guilty, which means that you're acting along with, or another old phrase we use is acting in concert with. So there is a common criminal plan, and that common criminal plan is to do something bad. In this case, the common criminal plan was to give Gillis Burnett something which she would use to kill her husband.
So that hasn't really changed in all those years then in Scotland. That's a big part of the accused, isn't it? So that's very interesting.
The way the Witchcraft Act deals with it is it instead of saying that they were acting together in concert to kill someone, the Witchcraft Act deals with it slightly differently. What it says is that you are guilty of witchcraft if you were a witch providing the spells, or you were also guilty of witchcraft if you asked someone to provide a spell. So it dealt with it in a technically slightly different way by providing for two different crimes there, but they both come under the umbrella of witchcraft. You would probably have expected these women to be tried at the same time, Margaret Abernethy and Gillis Burnett, but they weren't. And what we do know is that for some reason Gillis Burnett was not tried until 1671. That's some 2 years later than Margaret Abernethy. We are told that the characterisation of her witchcraft crimes are consulting a known witch, which would have, of course, been consulting Margaret Abernethy, the demonic pact, and the demonic pact is the pact that you make with the devil to be bad and do his bidding, and that usually means renouncing your baptism.
Not the pact between then the witch and the client, as it were. So that's not that pact. It's about you as the accused witch's personal pact with the devil.
Yes, that's the demonic pact, is that you make an agreement with the devil, and it's usually, you have to renounce your baptism, obviously, and then the devil offers you something. I saw on the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft one person saying that she was promised all the riches by the devil, but when the devil left her, it turned into mud. She'd confessed, inverted commas, to the devil having given her all these riches and having it changed to mud as part of the demonic pact. So the characterisation of her crimes were consulting a known witch, a demonic pact, and maleficium, i.e. Gillis Burnett was said to have gone to Margaret Abernethy and said, "Can you give me a spell to kill my husband?" Now, it's said that she was implicated not by one, but by two witches. So by implication, we think that Margaret Abernethy perhaps named her as a person that had asked her for help. Because if she was implicated, as it was said here, implicated by two witches, one of them would certainly appear to be Margaret Abernethy, but I had to do a wee bit of searching around, and it was really easy on the Scottish database, I would have to say. I was able to do a bit of searching around and find out that the other person was called Isabel Spens, and we'll come to her story in a minute. But sticking with Gillis Burnett at the moment, what we know was that she was accused of killing her previous two husbands by witchcraft. So when she went to ask Margaret Abernethy to help her kill her husband by way of providing a spell, the raw enchanted flesh, so that she could kill her husband, that appears to have been her second husband, John Smith. Her first husband had also died, John Gibson, and she was accused of killing him as well. But it's not known, doesn't say anywhere, how she was said to have killed him. What we are told is that on both accused killings, she placed something under her then husband's bed. Of course, we know in the case of Margaret Abernethy, it was said that it was a piece of enchanted raw flesh. For the alleged murder of her first husband, it was said that she had bought enchanted powder. The powder supposedly caused him to have problems in his, inverted commas, in his privy parts with burning. Now, I don't know whether or not it's alleged that this was a spell of Isabel Spens, or Isabel Spens was just somebody who was named as a witch and not actually involved in it at all. But we can see here she's alleged to have killed both her husbands in these two odd ways involving alleged witchcraft. What we know in this trial, however, is Gaylis Burnet was defended by advocates. As you know, I'm an advocate myself, and the Faculty of Advocates was established in 1532, and she was defended and prosecuted by advocates. And that's the exact same today. Advocates still both defend and prosecute as part of their job. They can do either.
Can I ask another question? For those of us that are not legal beagles or legal eagles, whatever it is, do you choose as an advocate if you're going to go down one route or the other? So are there like defence advocates and prosecution advocates, or do you just choose on a case by case business?
It's not usually by a case by case business. What happens is that you can apply to become an advocate depute, so deputised from the Lord Advocate, and you can prosecute either individual cases, like you've said, or more usually you undertake to do it for a number of years. So it's quite common for people as advocates to have an expertise in some other area of law and then to go into Crown Office for a number of years to do prosecution. You can ask to prosecute or defend, and if you're granted a commission to do so, you can prosecute as well as defend.
Very educational.
So,
sorry.
No. The Faculty of Advocates was, as I said, established in 1532, and famous advocates include numbers of celebrated figures: Sir Walter Scott, Robert Louis Stevenson, James Boswell, and much more recently, Alexander McCall Smith were all advocates and are all advocates at the Scottish Bar. So
I hadn't realised that they were the first two were lawyers then.
Yes.
So that's as an English teacher, that just shows a massive gap in my knowledge. But that's interesting. I didn't realise that they came from that background. I knew that Alexander McCall Smith is a lawyer and is from that background, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, so they would have been involved perhaps in defence or prosecution. I don't know. We'll have to check our records and see whether or not they were involved in any criminal trials. I'm not sure about that. They might have been involved in civil law. So we know the names of the advocates that were involved in defending Gaylis Burnet. Their names of the defence were Mr. Alexander Anderson and Mr. George Bands. Now, there are two advocates there. Probably one advocate was more senior than the other. At the Faculty of Advocates, we have a definition of, junior advocates and senior advocates, and the senior advocate would take the lead role in a case, and the junior advocate would take the lesser role, but they might have more to do with, for example, research, bringing together cases, that sort of thing, and the lead advocate would be more lead in the actual hearing itself. So it says there were the two of them, Alexander Anderson and George Bands. They also named two other people for the defence, David Deek, D-E-I-K, and George Nicholson. And I think they were probably solicitors, because advocates in Scotland can't simply represent clients directly. They're instructed by solicitors, and the client relationship with the solicitor and the solicitor's relationship is with the advocate. And that is how people are instructed in those sorts of cases. So I suspect that David Deek and George Nicholson, because there's no information about them being advocates, I suspect that they were the solicitors, the law agents involved in instructing Alexander Anderson and George Bands to act on behalf of Gaylis Burnet. So what I think we can tell about Gaylis Burnet is she was a woman of some means. because she was able to instruct a large team of advocates, not simply one advocate, but two.
Funny when her first husband died.
Quite possibly. What we also know is the names of the prosecutors in this case. She was prosecuted by Mr. Alexander Brown and Mr. William Moneypenny, Advocate Depute, and that's the deputisation from the Lord Advocate to prosecute. So they were, Mr. William Moneypenny was the prosecuting advocate, and Mr. Alexander Brown may have been a solicitor. It doesn't say that he was an advocate. And we don't know anything about the trial, but she was acquitted of the charges against her. So it would appear that having people that were able to defend you in your case, well, might or might not have played a part in this. We do know, of course, that many people who were legally represented were still convicted. And we also know some people who had no representation at all were acquitted. So I don't think we can read too much into that, but it certainly must have helped that she was assisted by advocates and she was acquitted of the charge. So what of the third person involved in all of this, the other person that Galis was said to have consulted or had been named by Galis, Isabel Spens? We know that she was from Aberdeen, that she was a widower, and her socioeconomic status is described as middling. It's noted that her husband, that she'd been married to, was a bookbinder. His name was Francis Van Hagen. The allegation against her was that Galis Burnett supposedly consulted her for the killing of her husband. We know that the man who investigated the case was called John Preston, and what's recorded, and it's really strange, Zoe, that such details are recorded. I suppose they needed such financial records, but we know that he was paid 10 merks per day for his work. But what we don't know, even though we know how much the investigator was paid and all this detail, is unfortunately the records don't record the outcome of her case. So we know...
That's really telling in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just, you'd said to me before, we've got the names of the legal team, as it were, written down. We know about the money side of it a little bit anyway. But, to not actually record the outcome of the trial, that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It's very, very sad that we don't have those. But these were three women accused of witchcraft. We know one of them was acquitted. We don't know the outcome of the trial or the other two. What we do know about those is that the accusation of witchcraft would cause people to be taken into custody, to be tortured, to be held in very, very bad conditions pending their trial. And what would have happened to these women would have been incredibly unfortunate. Now, some people might say, well, if that woman really consulted two other women about killing their husband, should they not be still guilty? Should they not be found guilty of witchcraft? And my answer to that is, whatever they might have been doing, it wasn't witchcraft.
Yeah. If there was evidence that it was a kind of a straightforward pact to murder, then they would have gone with that, surely. The fact that there's this kind of nebulous, there was a, powder under the bed, there was enchanted flesh under the bed. I mean, that doesn't seem like the strongest of evidence.
No, to say the least, it doesn't seem like the strongest of evidence. But yes, you would expect if it was a straightforward murder case for it to be dealt with as a murder case. Even then, whatever these women were doing, even if they were doing what is said that was happening, they weren't doing witchcraft. And of course, we have to remember that we're hearing these stories only because allegations of witchcraft had arisen. It could all be lies, made up because people were placed in situations where they were trying to avoid further torture. Yeah. So the stories that are interwoven into these three cases, you have to take with a large pinch of salt, because the stories that were obtained from people were obtained in circumstances that in any ordinary court would never be admissible, because they had been obtained in a manner so unfair to those that were standing accused.
it's just grim, isn't it?
Yeah. I very much hope that what happened was that the other two women weren't convicted of witchcraft, because, of course, if they were, the Act says that there's only one outcome, and that is to be killed. So I hope these women weren't killed of witchcraft on this very scant information in relation to this one woman at the centre of it,
Yeah.
Burnett.
It just goes to show again, like the complete nonsense of the idea that you sell your soul to the devil, or however you want to term it, and that, you're doing that for power and riches. And yet the first woman we're talking about here was a beggar, like that. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you have these magical powers? Why would you be able to murder somebody without actually touching them, and still be poor enough that you're begging people? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and when I heard you read at the start that Margaret Abernethy had provided this for sixpence and a pint of ale, it's just so sad.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. One thing that we haven't really talked about was, obviously within Christianity, there's a construct that, that you live, you might live a terrible life. It's really awful and stressful, and that you'll get your reward in heaven. Is there an equivalent for people that worship the devil? But hell is awful. Like, it's not like, there's not like an idea that there's a party room, like there's all these like low level miscreants who are just going to get burned and tortured for eternity. And then like her witch is in some sort of like special green room, like where there's booze and hot young guys or whatever, it's bizarre. Like, I don't understand it really. Because like I could understand like within the Christian construct that woman living as a beggar, she'd have the idea that, at the end of days that she'd get her reward. But I just, is there an equivalent? I don't know. Maybe someday there's an expert on construct of the afterlife for people that are the devil. I don't know.
As you say, because if the pact with the devil is you get all the world's riches, and you're thinking, well, I'm clearly not getting them in this life, why would you expect to get them in hell?
Yeah.
That's
because you would think that if there was like a cool and sexy afterlife that was the opposite of heaven, that the devil would have really good marketing. Do you know what I mean? Like, you'd be like, wow, that sounds. It just doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. No. Like Club Med, like with fire. I don't know.
I'm interested. I think it's saying a lot more about your psyche, Zoe, than what this was actually about. To identify hell as Club Med, except with fire for those that had got into pacts with the devil. But yeah.
But I think also it says a lot about my psyche that when I was reading that, I was thinking, on the one hand, as a very sensible grown-up adult lady, I was thinking this is absolutely terrible. And on the other hand, I was thinking, but that is a good name for a band, Enchanted Meat.
Oh no! Like that. Why would that be a good name for a band?
It'd be like, have to be fairly heavy metal, I think.
I think you and I would maybe like different music. No, Enchanted.
I'm not into heavy metal. I'm just thinking that if I was going to have a heavy metal band, that Enchanted Meat would be quite good, I think. Okay, I'm not suggesting to start a band called Enchanted Meat, Claire. It's okay.
I don't.
We'd be much classier than that, I think, probably.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you can spend the next week thinking of a name that would suit us for a band, Zoe, but not Enchanted Meat. Why don't we speak to some real musicians?
Good plan. Yes, definitely. Let us go over to Heal Harrow. We're delighted today to be joined by Rachel Newton and Lauren McCall, who are going to talk to us about their new project, Heal Harrow. So, hello and welcome to the show, Rachel and Lauren.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hi.
Thanks so much.
Could you tell us a wee bit about yourselves and really what the project is?
Yes, I'll go first, shall I? So yeah, I'm Rachel, and yeah, Lauren and I have known each other since we were, I'd say, about 8 or 9 years old. We used to go to the Fèis Roche, which is the sort of Gaelic arts tuition festival based up in Rossshire. I'm from Edinburgh, but my family are from up north, so that's kind of how I ended up going to that. And Lauren's from the Black Isle, so yeah, we met there and have been sort of playing music together informally since then. And then I'd say maybe kind of about 6-7 years ago, we started playing music together professionally. Lauren played on my solo album, and then I worked with Lauren on her projects. So we've worked with each other a long time, and we just decided that now was the time to do a sort of duo project, which is very exciting.
Yeah, the last project that we worked on together was a piece of mine, a commissioned work called The Seer, which was a body of work inspired by the life and prophecies of the Bran Seer, who was a prophet who, the latter part of his life was spent in Roshire, and he was supposedly burned for witchcraft on the end of Channery Point in the Black Isle, where I grew up. And so that project, we spent a couple of years working on the music for that and touring that. And in 2019, we were touring that up north, and we, as part of that tour, we visited the Witch's Stone of Janet Horn in Dornoch, and that kind of set us on this thinking of perhaps a new project that we could work on together. This last year, I guess it's been a different year, 2020, for everyone, and what it did in a positive way was it created a little space in the diary to get our heads together and start something new.
And can I just ask, for the purposes of our listeners that don't know, what do you both play? And we've got listeners from all over the world, so they might not be familiar with what Scottish music there is. So if you could kind of do like a beginner's primer for what it is that you do for those that aren't familiar with our culture.
Absolutely. Well, I play the fiddle, a bit of viola, but the fiddle primarily, or the violin, exactly same instrument. And Rachel plays the harp, the viola, and sings both in Gaelic and in English, and writes songs too. So we work loosely within the kind of folk and traditional music genre, but our work takes us into lots of different parts of the rich Scottish music scene.
I think our kind of shared interest that's kind of related to, I suppose, the folk and traditional side of music is the sort of historical aspect of it, and the fact that a lot of these songs and tunes have these incredible stories attached to them. And I think that's a big part of why this project kind of interested us. We both are really interested in just sort of digging a bit deeper into what kind of lies beyond, beneath like a song or a tune. And I think the songs especially are, like these old ballads and things like that. They really show us how kind of relatable these, quite often women, I always look for women's perspective in ballads, and how relatable these people were, and how these sort of modern parallels are so kind of clear to see, in these songs. And that's definitely a kind of aspect that really kind of drew us to this project that we're doing, Heal Harrow.
So tell us about Heal Harrow. Tell us about the name and what you want for the project, what you want to do with that project.
Yeah, well, I mean, Heal Harrow, it's always difficult coming up with names for anything, isn't it?
Ours was quite straightforward.
Yeah, you sort of tell it like it is. Isn't it?
although there was a bit of controversy about it, because should we call the people witches because, they're women, not witches? But first of all, that's quite a difficult and long title. These were womennotwitches.com or whatever. But the other thing was that I thought, well, history records these people as witches just now, and the whole point of it is to take Witches of Scotland and to make it Women of Scotland. So that was why we decided that way. But anyway, yes, it wasn't as straightforward as it seemed, I suppose, at first blush.
Yeah.
But tell us about yours. Do tell.
So I think when we started looking into this, we saw that there were quite a few kind of binaries, I suppose, or the two different aspects or sort of conflicting aspects, and also because it's a duo, we kind of thought it was quite nice to have this sort of these two elements. And heal, I suppose, kind of partly comes from this idea that, I mean, of course, it wasn't all women in the witch trials. A lot of these women were, as we know, women that that were very unfortunately tied up with it. But we're quite interested in this kind of healing aspect. There were some women who were the healers in their community, but also I think maybe that idea of healing in terms of, I suppose, remembering and and the healing process of, that's a very, very long-term thing of actually remembering what happened to these women, not just in the witch trials, but, women across history, that were connected to, have thought of as witches or similar to that. So yeah, that was kind of Heal. And then Harrow, of course, is just, I suppose, the harrowing aspect of it, which is just, it's just such a harrowing kind of experience that people had. So I guess that was kind of how Heal and Harrow came about.
So what do you foresee happening with the project? What form will it actually take?
Our kind of first aim with this is to write a body of work which will be an album based on 10 stories, and those stories, this is an exclusive for your podcast. We've commissioned brilliant writer Mary Kidd, a very good friend of ours, to write 10 stories, both based
Fantastic.
on... She's
that's great. And obviously a friend of our podcast. She was a very, very early guest, and before we started making the podcast, I interviewed Mary nearly a year ago, and my heart almost breaks to even remember this as my last time out at a literary festival. But at the Pitlochry Winter Words Festival, which is almost a year ago, I interviewed Mary about her book there, and I knew at the time Claire and I were getting ready to do the podcast, and I was thinking we have to get her on as a guest because she just tells the stories so well. So she's a brilliant choice for your project. That's very exciting for us to have. As I said earlier, it's a scoop. I feel like we've got breaking news.
We've got breaking news.
It's not fake news.
No, it's not fake news. So you've got Mary writing 10 stories, and then what will you do with that then?
So those stories will be the inspiration for the music. So the idea is 10 stories and 10 tracks, and that will form this album and book product, if you like. And that'll be the start of this project that we hope will tour in the year following. And there's lots of other strains to it and aspects which we're kind of piecing together, because as you know, when you embark on bits of research or you're delving into these things, it does really grow arms and legs. And since we've told the world a little bit about what we're doing, we've found out so much more, and so many people have been very generous with their information and their own research and their own thoughts on the topic. So it's massive, isn't it? And we're just getting going. So but yeah, really delighted to have Mary on board. She's the perfect person, we thought, for this, not only for her writing, but she's got an amazing knowledge of Gaelic culture and language and the song and traditional music element of what makes us tick as musicians. She's in a perfect place to work with us, I think.
So are you currently in the sort of research period of your role? Are you already writing music, or do the two happen at the same time?
Well, usually they would maybe happen at the same time, but yeah, during this time it's just impossible to be allowed to get together to make music. And I think, given we have done quite a lot of, we've been sitting on Zoom with each other for a lot of time over the last 5 or 6 months, and I think one of the things that has made us keep looking forward and look forward within the project is this aim of being allowed to get together to make music and to do something that is a lot easier when you're in person.
But it's been nice to work in a slightly different way, I think, as well, you know, and to really set something up, you know, like we are still, as Lauren said, we're still learning and still researching, and things are coming to us as well. People are coming to us with their stories and ideas, and that's been really nice. And I think when we do come to kind of make the music, I think we'll have this foundation, and especially with Mary's stories as well, we'll have this foundation to work from, which I think is just a really nice place to be. Hopefully we'll do it justice.
Absolutely. I'm sure you will do it justice. I've absolutely no doubt about it. But I was just so delighted when I heard about it that there was going to be more people bringing the voices of these women back. And as you said yourself, Rachel, the stories of people don't change. The ballads that we hear about of old, and the feelings that they had, and the relationships that they formed, and the situations they got themselves into in their life don't change on a human level from the same sort of things that happen now. I mean, we may have iPhones and fast cars, but it doesn't really matter to issues of the heart, I suppose.
Definitely, and I think when you hear it in terms of a story or a song, it kind of paints that picture, and it can. I think it gives you the opportunity to delve into these little elements of real life, because sometimes you kind of, when you're reading about it, it can be quite overwhelming. But I think if you hone in on a person or character and really imagine what their experience was, you can really start to relate to it, I think.
One of the things that you've said on the website that I definitely connect with was the idea about humanising the stories. And I think that's something that we keep coming back to all the time. And I'm like like a squeaky wheel on this one. But it's something where there was a moment for me where it went from being just a story about witches, being Scottish, and you just sort of think, well, yeah, the witches were burned, and you didn't really think too much more about it. So then making the connection that actually these were all people. And I think what you're doing is really important, and it sits really nicely alongside what we're trying to do, which is just bringing people back to think they were just people. They were mostly women. They were just people living their lives, and this terrible thing happened. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and also something we've talked about a little bit on that line about how relatively recent this all really was. And when we went and had a look at Janet Horn's at the Witch Stone there in Dornoch, it was the date 1727 that kind of really jumped out to me, even though she was the last witch to be executed. But I just couldn't help but think that was within 10 years of the Battle of Culloden, which is something that I probably spent most of my childhood learning about in school. It's the only thing I can remember from Scottish history lessons. And it was really, really drummed into us, that history and how important it was. But also about how, that it was quite a part of modern history, if you like, and very relevant to Highland culture and very important on that level. And to think that actually these women, it was all within the same time. And I think I grew up thinking that was part of much earlier Scottish history. So it really, that really kind of heightened my awareness of how recent times that really was.
Lauren, did you learn at all about the women that were killed as witches in school? I didn't, I don't think.
I have no memory of that, no.
I mean, I have very little memory of school, but
yeah. I think we might have done only in sort of the context, not in a historical context, but probably more in a kind of a creative. I mean, I remember doing the way, I don't know if they still do this at primary school. When I went to primary school in the 1800s, we did this where our class did a dance to, like, the Dance Macabre, which I know I'm pronouncing horribly. And then we went somewhere in Fife. I went to school in Fife. We went somewhere like Lochgelly or Glenrothes or something. And then all these other primary classes had people that weren't dance teachers that had made us make up these dance responses. And I remember that because we were like witches and skeletons in that one, in my memory. But I can't really remember anything else particularly. I don't, like maybe Tam O'Shanter, but other than that, definitely weren't taught anything about. And there was loads of stuff in Fife. Loads of stuff happened in Fife, but it wasn't covered. But I think that's probably because teachers themselves, I mean, I'm a teacher, so I totally get this. If you don't know about it, we don't have like a set curriculum in Scotland. It's a lot of it is about your personal interests and, the stuff that you sort of come across. So I suppose if we don't really know about that, and it's not really talked about too openly, then it maybe wouldn't occur. I would hope that'll change a wee bit now, and that like resources like what you're doing and what we're doing with the podcast might make people think, well, this is an aspect of history that is worth telling. It doesn't just have to be about what men did. It doesn't just have to be about, well, this is actually about what men did. As she says, quickly correcting herself. Maybe it's not glorious things that men did. Maybe sometimes things that are terrible that men did are actually really worth looking at. So, I mean, for example, I'm going to go on a slight rant about this, but talking about things being close in time. What happened last night when the story broke about Phil Spector, the murderer and music producer, dying? I had Radio 6 on in the background just having my tea, and it mentioned him, about being a producer, and then it said, and he was convicted of murdering an actress, and didn't mention her name. And I was kind of like, guys, have we learned nothing? Like, what is going on here? Like, you're burying the lead there. I remember that court case and I had to go away and look it up, but her name was Lana Clarkson, and it needs to be mentioned, you know, that he murdered this woman, Lana Clarkson, not he murdered an actress, you know. And I think it's very similar with the witches. We're just like the witches, and it's this kind of like blob of humanity that were strangled and then their bodies were burnt. Like we need to do what we're doing, which is name and talk about specific things. So sorry about that small rant, but it really gets on my nerves.
I love a good rant, and I totally agree. I felt exactly the same last night when reading the news about that. But I think that's why it's so important, isn't it? Because it's not as if it's a kind of isolated incident that happened then, and we're looking at it from afar. It's something. Well, it's something that still goes on in some countries, of course, and also it's so related to that attitude of not naming women in those circumstances and not prioritizing them, you know, or valuing them, really, their lives. And
I think what's really interesting about what you're doing is because we're obviously doing it in a talking way with the podcasts, but what you're doing, exploring it through music, I think is really interesting as well, because that'll move people in ways that maybe talking doesn't necessarily. So I think the more ways in which that's being talked about and explored and reckoned with, I think the more chance we've got of growing as a country. And actually, instead of sitting on our laurels and going, oh, isn't Scotland wonderful and progressive? Actually, in lots of ways, we're not. And we really need to face up to that and, you know, and be realistic about it and say, right, well, let's deal with stuff in the past and think about the impact that has on the present and the future. So good that you're doing this.
Especially for young people to feel not only connected to their culture, but to have a real knowledge going forward of how to treat people, and on a basic human rights level, to know that this happened in their country and that Lincoln Welsh shouldn't happen again. It's very important.
That's exactly, Lauren, why I asked you earlier whether or not you were taught it in school, because we were taught about arable sheep farming. We learned how to leave a field fallow and what crops we could plant and stuff like that. We did learn about the Highland clearances. But, you know, as you say, just a very, very short time before some of the most important parts of Scottish history in terms of the way Scotland developed, there was this huge period of time. I mean, can you imagine if you had been taught about these women while you were at primary school and the wrong that was done to them? And it just beggars belief that we haven't talked about it, or we don't as a nation all know. I mean, one of my sort of favourite conversational starters when people are talking about witches, you say, well, what witch trials, what do you think of? And people say Salem. I say, do you know how many women and men were killed as witches? 15 women, 4 men, and all of them were pardoned. They have a beautiful memorial bench. Do you know how many in Scotland were accused? 4,000, and approximately 2,500 of them killed. And people just have had, hopefully now they do, but as a generality, people just did not appreciate that. Didn't know that happened.
That was definitely my like Arthur Miller's the Crucible. That was kind of like my understanding really of it, and that had a real impact. I remember that having a real impact as a child, but without really realizing that.
But no one said,
about our own.
Said to you while you were doing the Crucible, nobody said, just FYI, whilst this happened in a small scale here, and we've got the story of it and these people's names, just to let you know that in Scotland this happened on an industrial scale. We were.
And I think partly, and it is definitely an aspect that we're really interested in, in terms of belief, otherworldly kind of beliefs and things like that. And that'll definitely be a part of this project as well. But I wonder whether, I suppose it's like, because of that sort of muddies the water a wee bit in terms of people not quite realising that this very real thing that happened, that was very, in some ways, a lot of that was very separate to those beliefs, and it was, people's had their own agenda for doing what they did. And I quite like the fact that a lot of that is it's quite dry in a sense, it's not it's not mythological, it's, and I think that's definitely interested us, that there's these two very different aspects of it. But it maybe does kind of, people, usually when people think of witches, they think of, all of the stereotypes, don't they?
But I'm sure coming to what you are doing will engage people, and engage people, they will find both the parts of the story. And it was both parts of the story, because the people that lived at the time, their belief system was that of the devil being a real thing that lived amongst us, and demons and fairies and witches familiars and all those sorts of things. I'm thinking in particular, Zoe, about your very favourite witch, and I'm very much hoping that might be one of the 10 that you deal with. It's Goramal.
Oh yeah, our cat army.
Yeah, because she features in Mary's book, doesn't she? Yeah, it's been fantastic. Yeah,
I love that.
Putting a good word for
love
her.
the idea of that. I know. Obviously, that it could be rubbish and all the rest of it, but I do like the idea that in there's sort of a glimmer of sort of raging vengeance, and that she had these magical cats that could set fires. I just think that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I love that as well.
Rachel and I, as musicians and as artists, we're always going to be drawn to, if we're looking for inspiration on something. I suppose if you were, say, a historian looking through the survey of Scottish witchcraft, it might be a very specific historical detail that might catch your eye. But for us, it's something, something like those little stories, or somebody turning into a hare, or, those things catch your eye on an initial aspect. There was one that we just came across the other day of Isabel Elliot, who was from Dalkeith, and her trial was in Edinburgh in 1678, and so she was accused of witchcraft, but also the folklore surrounding her was that she supposedly turned into a bee with one of her pals in order to go and poison her victim. So those little things, I mean, you can't ignore them, can you? They're little gems of imagery that will, I suppose, in our writing, they'll definitely inspire something. But I think with just having the two things going hand in hand, there's that little aside on the bottom of her trial record, and then there's the very real aspect of, I was just looking at all the people who were witness the execution, witness. It's just a list of names, and it's really harrowing. And so you find yourself having a little laugh at the bee thing, or the gang of cats that go after somebody, or the woman that turned into a midgie, which definitely caught our eye. And then that gives you a little bit of light in what is a pretty dark topic to sift through.
You've even got the duality in your name with, as you said at the start, the Heal and Harrow, and it's that duality that does run through it that I suppose, I mean, one of the reasons we're talking about it is it's still a fascinating time in history. So we acknowledge it's a terrible time, but it's still fascinating to find out about. And it's that duality in what we talk about, I suppose, that keeps people listening. It was terrible and we want to do something about it. But there's also that part of us that we want to find out what the stories were. What did people believe at that time? They thought, what? A woman turned herself into a seal, or they affected the weather. Weather witches were a big thing down in Berwick because of the sea and stuff like that. So I think personally it's fair enough to acknowledge the duality in these things, and to acknowledge that they're both interesting and harrowing. I think we're all right in that. And an email just arrives at that very moment.
Now, is this an email?
It's an email. It's an email from the past, so you should all be very, very somber. The way that we engage as modern storytellers, and I say that in the very loosest sense for me, because I am not creative in the way that Zoe is, but I suppose the way that we engage is to tell stories, and the way those stories become engaging is by the interesting parts of it, not by the dusty parts of the story.
How can listeners get in touch with what you're doing and follow the progress of the project?
We do have a website. It's more of a holding page, but if you can sign up to a newsletter on the website, and there's also links to our social media accounts. So the website is healandharrow.com. Everything that we have is there so far is there. So yeah, come and say hello.
Brilliant. Well, we'll post links to that when we are posting up this podcast, and we've shared already a lot when the Scotsman covered it, and you got a great response from that article, and I was really, really pleased to see so many people positively engaging with your idea.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Pretty overwhelmed with that, to be honest. I think, as Rachel already said, it's quite unusual for us to launch a project before we've even really begun, but it's been a really nice way round to do it and to hopefully just add our voice to all the great work that you're all doing with the campaign.
Well, we totally cannot wait. I mean, not only, as Zoe has said before, not only can we wait to just get out of our houses but at this particular time, but we absolutely can't wait. There are so many people that we want to see, but we really, really look forward to hearing from you guys in the future and seeing the work you're doing. So we hope you will stay in contact and keep us updated as things happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, you'll be on the guest list. Definitely, for sure. Once you finally get a gig.
And guest list, Chloe. That's us made it. We're big time now.
We've got a scoop after on the guest list. We've made it, Claire. That's it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for listening to the Witches of Scotland podcast. Can't quite believe it, but next week is actually going to be our 20th episode. And I am delighted to say that we're going to be speaking to Douglas Spears, who is archaeologist for Fife and Dundee. He is so interesting, and I love this next episode that's coming up. So please do share our details on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, TikTok, not TikTok. Although we do have TikTok, don't we?
We do. I'm a lurker. I'm lurking on TikTok.
I don't. My kids would strangulate me if they knew I was on TikTok. They don't use it. It's beneath them. Anyway, they please do share about what we're doing, because the more people, I know I keep saying this, but the more people that are listening and engaging, the more likely we are to ultimately get what we want with the campaign. So please do share and tell people about us. And it's a pleasant way to pass some time. So join us next week for episode 20. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye. If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Record. So in episode 19...
I just hear my voice. My voice is really, really high in my head. Like in my head, it's deep, like Marielle Frostrup's, right? But then when I think about it, it's actually really up here, and I have to go and bring it right back down again.
Oh no! But your voice is naturally deeper. Mine is much higher.
Okay, that's good. Well, it's good that there's balance then.
Today's podcast should be like, welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast.
What happens when some witches wear pointy hats in Scotland? Right, okay. Enchantedmeat.com.
Oh, enchanted meat. Oh dear.